The night burned with fire and rage as Serafina faced her father in the village square. The soldiers who had once marched proudly in his name now hesitated, their eyes darting between the Baron's cruel face and the glowing power in Serafina's hands. For so long they had thought of her as nothing more than a weak girl, a cripple hidden away in the shadows of his palace. But here she was, sitting tall in her chair, her eyes alive with fire, her strength spilling out into the night like a storm that could not be stopped. Cale stood beside her, his blade steady, his body like a wall between her and the danger around them. He did not speak, but his presence gave her courage. She could feel his loyalty in the way he stood close, ready to fight and die for her if needed. That bond gave her the strength to look directly at the man who had tormented her all her life. The Baron sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Do you think your little trick makes you powerful, Serafina? You are nothing but a mistake. You will always be a burden. You will never stand as my equal." His words stabbed at the wounds she had carried since childhood. The same cruel phrases he had whispered again and again to break her spirit. For a heartbeat the fear returned. She saw herself once more as a small girl in his cold palace, locked away, mocked and forgotten. But then she remembered Cale's voice telling her she was strong. She remembered the way the villagers had looked at her earlier, not with pity but with awe. She remembered the raiders who had fallen before her power. Her fear melted into defiance. The glow around her hands grew brighter, illuminating the square. She met her father's gaze and said, "I am not your mistake. I am your downfall." The Baron's smile twisted into rage. With a roar, he raised his weapon, a black blade that seemed to drink the firelight around it, and charged. His soldiers followed, their boots shaking the ground. Cale moved at once, meeting the Baron's men with steel. His sword clashed against theirs, sparks flying, his movements quick and fierce. But the Baron himself broke through, his strength far greater than ordinary soldiers. He swung his blade at Serafina, the force enough to split stone. Serafina lifted her hands and her power flared. A shield of light erupted around her, the blow crashing against it like thunder. The ground trembled, cracks spreading through the cobblestones. The impact sent pain rushing through her arms, but she did not falter. She pushed back, her shield glowing brighter, and the Baron stumbled a step. His eyes widened in shock. He had expected her to break. Instead, she resisted. The battle raged across the square. Cale's blade cut through the soldiers, his movement steady even as wounds opened on his arms and shoulders. Serafina unleashed waves of light, striking enemies down, her body trembling with effort but her spirit unyielding. For every step the Baron tried to take toward her, she forced him back, her power burning hotter with every strike. Villagers watched from their windows, fear and wonder in their eyes. They had seen battles before, but never anything like this. Never a woman once thought broken, standing against the might of the Baron himself. The fight dragged on, the night filled with steel and fire. At last, Cale struck down the final soldier, leaving only the Baron standing in the square, his chest heaving, his armor scorched by Serafina's power. He glared at her, fury twisting his face. "You think you can defy me? I made you. You are mine." Serafina's voice rose above the crackling flames. "You never made me. You only tried to break me. But you failed." Her power surged again, brighter than ever before. Light poured from her hands, wrapping around her like wings. The ground shook beneath her as the energy burst forward, slamming into the Baron. He cried out as the force struck him, his blade shattering. His body thrown back into the ruins of the inn. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fire and the heavy breaths of Cale and Serafina. The Baron struggled to rise, his body weak, his face filled with disbelief. For the first time in his life, he looked at her not with mockery but with fear. Serafina wheeled forward, her power still glowing around her. She looked down at him, her voice steady. "You will never control me again. You will never chain me again. I am not your burden. I am not your shame. I am Serafina." The Baron tried to speak, but his words were lost as another wave of her power knocked him down, leaving him broken on the ground. His reign over her was finished. Cale came to her side, blood on his face, his sword hanging loose in his hand. He looked at her, awe filling his eyes. "You did it," he whispered. "You ended him." Serafina's chest rose and fell, her body weak, but her heart stronger than ever. She reached for Cale's hand, and he took it firmly, grounding her. In that moment, the world felt still, as if holding its breath for them. The villagers slowly emerged, their eyes wide with wonder. They looked at her not with pity, not with scorn, but with respect. Some even knelt, murmuring words of gratitude. To them, she was no longer the broken daughter of a cruel baron. She was a warrior, a savior, a symbol of hope. Seraphina looked at them, her eyes shining. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Not as a weak child, not as a burden, but as the woman she was meant to be. Cale leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. Your father tried to give you away as a joke. He thought you were nothing. But look at you now. You are more powerful than he ever was. Tears filled her eyes, not from sorrow, but from relief, from pride, from joy. She smiled, a smile that carried years of pain finally breaking apart. The night slowly faded into dawn. The fires died down and the first light of morning touched the village. Seraphina sat with Cale at her side, the warmth of his hand steady in hers. She had faced her past, destroyed her chains, and embraced her power. And though her journey was far from over, she knew one truth with certainty. She was not broken. She was not useless. She was not a mistake. She was a woman of strength, of fire, of unshakable will. As the sun rose over the valley, Seraphina lifted her face to the light. She was free. She was powerful, and she was ready for whatever the future would bring. The days that followed after the attack in the forest were unlike anything Seraphina had ever known. She could not stop thinking about what had happened that night, the moment when her hands glowed with power, the way the raider had frozen in fear before her, and how Cale had looked at her with something more than respect. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a broken shell. She felt alive. She felt dangerous. Cale, too, carried the memory of that night. Though he rarely spoke of it, Seraphina could tell his mind was always turning. He kept watching her closely, not out of doubt but out of curiosity, as if he was trying to understand her secret before she could. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him studying her hands, her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. He was not frightened of her power. If anything, he was drawn to it. One evening, as the sky turned red with sunset, Seraphina finally asked him, "Do you think what I did was dangerous?" Her voice was small, uncertain. Cale had just finished sharpening his blade. He paused, resting the sword across his knees, then turned toward her. "Dangerous?" he repeated. "Yes, but so is every true strength. Fire can burn, water can drown, but both can also give life. Your power is no different." "But what if I hurt you?" she whispered, her hands trembling as she looked at them. "What if I can't control it?" Cale leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Then I will teach you to control it. We will learn together." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. All her life, people had told her what she could not do, what she would never be. Cale instead told her what she could become. They began small experiments the next day. Cale found an abandoned clearing in the woods where no one would disturb them. "Close your eyes," he told her. "Feel what you felt that night. The anger, the fear, the fire inside you. But do not let it explode. Hold it, shape it. Make it obey you." Seraphina closed her eyes and tried. At first, nothing happened. She grew frustrated, her heart racing. But then, as Cale guided her breathing, a spark lit at her fingertips, tiny at first, barely a flicker of light, but it was enough to make her gasp. The power was still there, it hadn't vanished after that night. It lived inside her. "Good," Cale said, a smile touching his lips. Now again. Day after day, they practiced. Sometimes she managed to control the spark, to make it glow steady in her hands. Other times it surged too fast, bursting out in wild waves that frightened her. But each time she failed, Cale was there, calm and steady, reminding her that failure was part of growth. "Even the strongest warrior stumbles," he told her one evening when she had nearly collapsed from exhaustion. "What matters is that you rise again." As Seraphina grew more confident, she began to notice something else. Her power responded not just to fear, but to her emotions. When she was angry, it roared like a storm. When she felt joy, it shimmered like sunlight. And when she looked at Cale, really looked at him, the way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought, the way his eyes softened when they rested on her chest would grow warm, and the glow in her hands would pulse brighter. It frightened her, yet it thrilled her too. She had never felt anything like this before, and she was not sure which was more overwhelming, the discovery of her power, or the feelings that Cale stirred inside her. But their peaceful days of training did not last. One night, as they camped near the ruins of an old watchtower, Kyle heard distant horns echoing through the valley. His face hardened immediately. "Scouts," he muttered. "Your father's men." Serafina's stomach twisted. "They're searching for me." Kale nodded grimly. "And they're not far. They had little time." Kale packed their camp swiftly, his movements sharp and precise. But Serafina could not stop trembling. The thought of being dragged back to her father's palace, of hearing his cruel laughter again, filled her with dread. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice breaking, "if they take me back, he'll lock me away forever. He'll make sure no one ever sees me again." Kyle crouched before her, taking her hands in his. His eyes burned with a fierce light. "Listen to me. I will never let him take you back. Not while I still draw breath." His words were a vow, spoken not with empty promises but with unshakable certainty. Serafina felt her fear ease, replaced by something steadier. Trust. She believed him. That night the enemy found them. Dozens of soldiers surrounded the ruins, their torches blazing in the dark. At their head was a captain clad in black armor, his face twisted with cruelty. "By order of the Baron," the captain called out, his voice booming, "hand over the girl and we may yet spare your life." Kyle stepped forward, his sword gleaming in the firelight. "Come and take her," he growled. The soldiers laughed, then charged. Kale met them head on, his blade moving like lightning, but there were too many, and though he struck down one after another, they kept pressing closer. Serafina's chest heaved as she watched. She could not sit still, not now. Not when Kale was fighting for her life. Her hands trembled, her heart racing, and she felt the power rising again, stronger than ever before. She closed her eyes and let it flow. Light burst from her hands, brighter and fiercer than anything she had summoned before. The ground shook and a wave of energy surged outward, knocking soldiers off their feet. Their torches scattered, their screams echoing through the night. When Serafina opened her eyes, the battlefield was chaos. Men lay sprawled on the ground, their weapons scattered, their faces pale with fear. Kale stood in the center, his chest rising and falling, his eyes wide as he looked at her. "You did this," he said softly, almost in disbelief. Serafina's hands still glowed faintly. Her body felt weak, drained, but she sat tall in her chair, her voice steady. "I will never go back to him, not now. Not ever." The soldiers, seeing their captain fall to his knees, fled into the night, their courage broken. The ruins fell silent once more, leaving only the crackle of dying torches. Kyle approached her slowly, his face filled with awe. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing hers. "You saved us," he whispered. "You saved me." Serafina looked at him, her heart pounding. For so long she had been the one who needed saving, the one who had to be protected. But tonight she had turned the tide. Tonight she had stood against her father's power, and won. In that moment she realized something. She was no longer just a paralyzed girl mocked by her own blood. She was more. She was dangerous, powerful, and free, and with Kale by her side, there was nothing she could not face. The firelight flickered across their faces as they sat together in the ruins. Serafina's power still hummed in her veins, and for the first time, she was not afraid of it. Instead, she embraced it. Because it was hers. It had always been hers. And now the world would finally see it. The ruins where Serafina unleashed her power were quiet now, but the silence felt heavy, as if the stones themselves remembered the screams of the soldiers. The fire from the torches had burned low, leaving only faint embers that glowed like tired eyes in the dark. Kale sat nearby, his sword resting across his knees, his gaze fixed on Serafina. He had fought countless battles in his life, but never had he seen anything like what she had done. Serafina sat in her chair, her hands still tingling from the energy that had poured through her. Her body felt weak, as though every bone had been drained of strength, but her spirit felt alive. For years she had been told she was powerless, that her body was nothing but a curse. Tonight she had proved them all wrong. She had stood against her father's soldiers and broken them with a force she had not even known she carried. But with that victory came questions. As the cold night wind brushed across her skin, Serafina lowered her eyes to her trembling hands. "What am I?" she whispered softly. Kyle turned his head toward her. "You are Serafina," he answered firmly. "You are not a burden, not a curse, not a mistake. You are yourself, and that is enough." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. His words warmed her, but deep inside she could not shake the fear that her power was something darker, something dangerous. But what if I lose control? She asked. What if one day I hurt you? Kale studied her for a moment, his expression calm but steady. Then I will be there to guide you, and if you stumble, I will help you rise again. You are not alone in this, Serafina. Those words wrapped around her heart like a shield. For so long she had felt isolated, abandoned in a world that had no place for her. Now, sitting beside Kale under the night sky, she felt something she had never dared to hope for: belonging. The following days were filled with both urgency and discovery. Kale knew that the Baron would not stop sending soldiers. The humiliation of losing so many men would only fuel his anger. They had to keep moving, staying hidden always one step ahead of the hunters. But in between their travels, Serafina practiced. Her powers, once unpredictable, began to take form. At first she could only summon light, glowing sparks that danced in her palms like fireflies. But as she grew bolder, she learned to shape it into lines, into small shields of shimmering force, even into waves of energy that pushed back anything in her path. Each success left her breathless, but it also filled her with pride. She was no longer just watching Kale fight to protect her. She was becoming a fighter herself. And Kale, he never treated her as fragile. He pushed her, challenged her, trusted her, as though he had always believed she was capable of greatness. Yet, the closer they grew, the more Serafina felt the weight of her emotions. At night, when the fire glowed low and Kale's face was lit by its soft light, she would catch herself staring at him. She admired the strength in his shoulders, the scars on his arms that told stories of battles past, the quiet gentleness in his eyes whenever they rested on her. Her chest would tighten, her pulse quicken, and sometimes, when her power sparked without warning, she would quickly look away, afraid he might see what she was feeling. Love was a strange and terrifying thing. She had never been allowed to feel it before, and now it consumed her quietly, as unstoppable as the power within her veins. One evening they reached the edge of a village hidden deep in the valley. It was a small place with stone houses and fields of golden grain swaying in the wind. Kale had hoped they could rest there for a night, buy supplies, and move on before the Baron's men arrived. But Serafina was nervous. She had never been among ordinary people before, not like this. As Kale wheeled her through the narrow streets, villagers turned their heads to stare. Some looked curious, others suspicious. A few children ran close, pointing and whispering. Serafina lowered her eyes, her hands tightening in her lap. The old shame returned, pressing against her chest. She could almost hear her father's mocking voice. Look at them. They see you for what you are, broken, weak. But then Kale leaned close and murmured, Hold your head high. You have nothing to hide. She lifted her chin. And when she did, she noticed something strange. Not everyone looked at her with pity. Some gazes held wonder, especially when a faint glow flickered around her fingertips. A few even smiled as though they saw something beyond her chair, something bright, something powerful. For the first time, Serafina realized the truth. The world did not only see her as broken, they could also see her strength if she chose to show it. That night they found shelter in a small inn. The keeper, a kind woman with silver hair, brought them warm food and blankets. Serafina sat by the fire while Kale spoke quietly with the villagers about rumors of soldiers nearby. She watched him from across the room, her heart swelling with unspoken feelings. When he returned, she whispered, You risk so much for me. Why? Why not leave me and save yourself? Kale looked at her for a long moment. Then he knelt so their eyes met, his voice steady. Because I see you, Serafina. Not the weakness your father wanted the world to see. I see your fire. I see your strength. And I will never leave that behind. Her breath caught, her heart racing. She wanted to speak, to tell him what stirred inside her, but the words tangled on her tongue. All she could do was hold his gaze, and in that silence, everything she could not say was spoken between them. But their peace did not last. Before dawn, shouts echoed through the village. The Baron's soldiers had arrived faster than Kale expected. Torches lit the streets, steel clashed against wood, and the villagers scattered in fear. Kale's hand went to his sword at once. Stay behind me, he told Serafina, his voice sharp with urgency. But Serafina shook her head, her eyes blazing. No, I will not hide anymore. Not tonight. As the soldiers stormed the inn, Kale cut them down with his blade, but Serafina raised her hands and her power roared to life. Light burst across the room, throwing the enemy back. Beams of energy shot from her palms, striking shields and shattering weapons. The villagers, who had once looked at her with suspicion, now stared in awe as she fought beside Kale, her chair glowing as though it carried her like a throne of fire. The battle spilled into the streets. Together, Kale and Serafina moved like one. His sword and her power danced in perfect rhythm, each strike protecting the other. Soldiers fell, their courage breaking under the weight of her strength. But in the chaos, Serafina saw something that froze her blood. At the edge of the square, standing tall and proud, was a figure she knew too well. Her father, the Baron, had come. His armor gleamed under the torchlight, his cruel smile sharp as a blade. His eyes locked on her, and his laughter cut through the night like poison. "So this is what you've become," he sneered, his voice carrying across the square. "A cripple who thinks herself a queen. Pathetic." Serafina's heart pounded, but this time she did not shrink from his words. She felt Kale's presence beside her, steady and unshaken, and her power surged in response. The fear that had once chained her was gone. She looked her father in the eye, her voice strong. "I am not your joke anymore," the Baron's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something he had never shown her before. Hesitation. And in that moment, Serafina knew the truth. The chains her father had placed on her were broken. She was no longer his prisoner, no longer his burden. She was free, and her power was only beginning to rise. The alien Baron was a ruler feared across many worlds. His palace was built high above the mountains, its black towers touching the sky like claws. He was known for his cruelty, for his cold laughter, and for the way he treated life as a game. For him, power meant humiliating others, making them feel small. That was how he proved to himself that he was above all. On the day Kale arrived, the Baron had already prepared a joke. Kale was a human warrior, brave and stubborn, who had challenged the Baron once before. Though Kale had not been defeated completely, he had been forced into the Baron's court, treated as a pawn rather than an equal. Many expected the Baron to kill him, but instead he smiled with a cruel twist and said, "No, I have a gift for you." The court laughed because when the Baron spoke of a gift, it was never truly a gift. It was a trap, a curse, or a humiliation. This time he brought forward a figure hidden behind a veil. It was his daughter, Serafina. She was pale and fragile, her body bound to a carved chair of silver and stone. Her legs were thin, unmoving, and her arms trembled when she tried to lift them. She could not walk, could not fight, and many whispered she could not even survive without help. The Baron waved his hand as if brushing away something worthless. "Here," he said mockingly. "Take her. She is of no use to me. A broken child, a paralyzed body. Let her be your burden. Let the great warrior carry dead weight." The court roared with laughter. They clapped, they cheered, enjoying the humiliation. To them, this was a perfect joke. Kyle, a man of strength, would be tied to someone who could not even stand. They expected Kale's face to twist with anger or shame. They expected him to refuse. But Kale only looked at the girl. Serafina lifted her eyes to him for the briefest moment. Her gaze was steady despite her fragile frame. In her eyes, Kale saw no weakness. There was something there, quiet, hidden, but strong, something no one else cared to notice. Kale stepped forward and bent on one knee, not before the Baron, but before the girl. He took her hand gently as if it were made of glass and said, "If you are given to me, then I will not see you as a burden. I will see you as my companion." The hall fell silent for a moment. Then laughter broke again, louder than before. The nobles whispered, mocking him. "The fool accepts. He takes the Baron's broken doll." But Kale did not hear them. His eyes remained on Serafina, and for the first time in her life she felt seen. Not as a failure, not as a shadow of the Baron's power, but as herself. The Baron smirked. He thought Kale was only pretending, only trying to save his pride. "Take her then," the Baron sneered. "Take her far from me. You will regret it." And so Kale carried Serafina from the grand hall. His arms were steady, his steps sure, while the crowd jeered behind him. But Serafina did not hear the jeers anymore. Her heart beat loudly, confused and shaken. She had lived her whole life as a joke in her father's court, whispered about as the weak daughter, the mistake, the curse. No one had ever taken her hand with such gentleness. No one had ever spoken to her without pity or cruelty. When they were finally outside the palace, the air sharp and cool against their skin, Kyle set her chair down gently and looked at her. "You do not need to fear me," he said. "I will not treat you as a burden." Serafina studied him, her voice trembling. Why? Why do you not laugh like the others? Kyle shook his head. Because I saw your eyes. They are not the eyes of someone weak. They are the eyes of someone strong, though the world refuses to see it. Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken words like that to her. All her life she had been told she was nothing more than her broken body. She wanted to believe him, but years of cruelty weighed heavy on her heart. She lowered her gaze. You do not know me. You cannot see strength in me. Kyle leaned closer, his voice calm but firm. I know strength when I see it. Strength is not always in the body. Sometimes it is in the will, the spirit, the fire hidden deep, and I see that fire in you. For a long time, Serafina was silent. She felt something stirring in her chest, something she had buried long ago. It was small, like a spark, but Kale's words had given it air. The journey away from the palace was not easy. Kale carried her across rough paths through forests and valleys. Others they met on the way sneered at the sight. A warrior carrying a fragile girl who could not move. Some spat, some laughed, some whispered cruel words. But Kale never faltered. When his arms grew tired, he set her gently in her chair. When the path was rough, he lifted her again without complaint. Serafina watched him with growing wonder. He never treated her with pity, never spoke to her as if she were less. He asked her questions, listened to her answers, and even smiled at her jokes. Slowly, she began to open her heart. One night, as they rested beneath the stars, Serafina whispered, Why do you not leave me? You could go farther, faster without me. You could live free. Kale looked at her, his eyes steady. Because I made a choice. You are not a burden. You are my responsibility now. More than that, you are a person worth standing beside. I will not abandon you. Her throat tightened. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, she felt warmth spread through her, something she had never felt before. That night, when Kale finally closed his eyes, Serafina remained awake. She stared at the stars above, their cold light spilling across the sky. For the first time, she did not feel like a mistake. She felt like perhaps she was more than what her father believed. Perhaps, with Kale's words echoing in her mind, she could be something greater. She clenched her trembling hands, whispering to herself, I am not broken. I am not worthless. The words felt strange on her tongue, but also powerful. And as the wind whispered through the trees, Serafina thought she felt something else inside her stir, a hidden strength, faint but alive, waiting to be discovered. Her father had given her away as a joke. The court had laughed at her misery, but Kale's kindness had planted a seed, and Serafina knew deep inside that one day they would all see what she truly was. They would see the fire her father had tried so hard to bury. That night a new story began, not of a broken girl, but of a hidden power waiting for its moment to rise. Kyle and Serafina traveled farther from the Baron's palace, each day pulling them away from the cruel laughter of the court. The mountains became smaller behind them, replaced by rolling hills and forests where the air felt freer. Yet Serafina carried the weight of her past within her. Even though Kale had spoken to her with kindness, her father's voice still haunted her. Mocking, cold, always reminding her that she was nothing but a burden. Kale pushed forward with quiet strength. He did not speak much about himself, but Serafina noticed how carefully he watched their surroundings, how his hand never strayed far from the hilt of his blade. He was a man who had lived through battles, but his touch was never harsh when it came to her. When he lifted her into his arms, it was as though he carried the most precious treasure. When he spoke, his voice was calm, never impatient, never cruel. One morning they stopped by a river. The water sparkled in the sunlight and birds moved swiftly between the trees. Kale placed her chair gently by the riverbank so she could feel the breeze on her face. Serafina watched the current flow past, her hands resting in her lap. Why do you do this for me? She asked suddenly, her voice soft but sharp with curiosity. You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me. Kyle crouched beside her, dipping his hand into the cool water. I told you already, he said simply. I don't see you as a burden. He looked at her then, his eyes unwavering. I see you as someone who deserves more than the chains your father placed on you. His words struck her heart like a hammer. She had heard pity before, false kindness from those who only wanted to appear good in her father's court. But Kale's words were different. They carried no pity, only truth. Still, she shook her head, her voice trembling. But what if I really am useless? What if I slow you down? What if I bring you nothing but trouble? Kyle leaned closer, his tone firm. Then I will still walk beside you. Because strength is not only measured in what you can do with your body, it is also in how you endure, how you keep living when the world wants you to give up. You have done that. That is strength. Serafina felt her chest tighten. No one had ever called her strong before. All her life she had been told she was fragile, weak, a mistake. Now Kale's words pushed against that wall of shame. For the first time she dared to believe there might be something more inside her. As they continued their journey, Serafina began to notice changes in herself. She started to speak more, asking Kale questions about his life, his battles, his dreams. He told her little pieces, about his village long ago, about the people he lost, about how he kept fighting because he had no other choice. His voice carried pain but also determination. She admired that about him. At night, when the fire crackled low, Serafina would stay awake, staring at the stars. Her mind would replay Kale's words, and slowly she began to whisper to herself, "I'm not broken. I am not worthless." She repeated it until it felt less like a lie and more like a seed beginning to grow. But their journey was not without danger. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched long, Kale sensed movement in the forest. He stopped, placing a hand on Serafina's chair. "Stay quiet," he whispered. From the trees emerged a group of raiders, their faces rough and cruel. They carried jagged weapons, their eyes sharp with hunger. "Well, what do we have here?" one of them sneered. "A strong warrior and his little crippled doll." They laughed harshly, circling like wolves. Kale drew his blade, his stance ready. "Stay behind me," he told Serafina. The raiders rushed forward, but Kyle fought like a storm. His sword flashed, his movement swift and precise. He cut down two before the others even realized what was happening. Still, there were many, and they pressed in from all sides. Serafina's heart pounded. She wanted to help, but her body betrayed her. Her legs refused to move. Her arms trembled when she tried to lift them. Rage burned inside her, a deep, furious fire. She hated feeling helpless. She hated hearing the raiders laugh at her, as if she were nothing but a weight dragging Kale down. As Kale fought, one of the raiders broke past him and lunged toward her. Serafina's breath caught. Fear gripped her, but beneath it was something else. Something powerful, something wild. She felt a surge inside her, like a storm waking from sleep. Her eyes burned, and suddenly light flickered from her fingertips. The raider froze, his body locking as if invisible chains bound him. His eyes went wide with terror. Serafina gasped, not understanding what had happened, but she felt the energy coursing through her veins. Without moving her legs, without raising her arms fully, she had stopped him. Kale turned, his eyes widening for only a moment before he struck down the raider. Then he glanced at Serafina, seeing the glow fading from her hands. "You," he whispered, but there was no time to speak further. Together, they defeated the raiders. Kyle's blade did the cutting, but Serafina's strange new power had weakened their enemies, turning the tide of the battle. When the last body fell, silence settled over the forest. Kale stood breathing hard, his sword dripping with blood. He turned back to her. Serafina's chest rose and fell quickly, her hands still tingling. What was that?" she whispered. Kyle knelt beside her, his expression serious but filled with awe. "That," he said slowly, "was your strength." Her eyes widened. "But I didn't know." He shook his head. "Your father hid you away, mocked you, made you believe you were powerless. But he was wrong. You have something inside you, something greater than any blade or muscle. Tonight you proved it." Tears stung her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of something long buried finally rising to the surface. She had always believed her body was her prison, her weakness. But now she realized there was more to her than she ever knew. For the first time in her life, Serafina smiled with true belief. "I am not useless," she whispered. Kale placed a hand over hers, his voice steady. "No, you are powerful, and this is only the beginning." As the firelight flickered across their faces that night, Serafina felt the spark inside her growing stronger. The world had always laughed at her, but now she knew the truth. She was not a joke, not a burden. She was something far greater, and one day, everyone who had mocked her would see it. And so their journey continued, not just as warrior and burden, but as two souls walking toward a destiny neither could yet imagine. Serafina carried within her a secret power, one that could shake the very foundations of her father's empire, and with Kale by her side, she was ready to discover just how far her strength could reach.